Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Suozzi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The work of this commission is so important. This is, as everybody's spoken, the Chinese Communist Party has a 70-year head start. And, taking all the information as to what's going on and getting it through this commission and out to the public is so important, considering this has been going on for such a long time. 61 years ago, the Dalai Lama was exiled from his own country. 25 years, the Panchen Lama was abducted. So similar to what Angus talked about the WTO, ever since Nixon went to China, we thought the more they were exposed to us and the more that they were exposed to the rest of the world and democracy and the world economy, the more they'd become like us. That simply has not happened. And we see it has been testified so many times. We had our hearings on the Uyghurs. We heard language, crimes against humanity, forced sterilization, forcing people to eat pork when it's against their religion, forcing people to eat when they're supposed to be fasting. I mean, it's, we see it with the Hong Kong students and the protesting that's going on. We see it certainly with the Tibetans. There was an article, September 21st from Reuters. The first line is, China is pushing growing numbers of Tibetan rural workers off the land and into recently built military-style training centers where they are turned into factory workers, mirroring a program in Western Xinjiang region that rights workers have branded coercive labor. So, I mean, this is the Chinese Communist Party has an overwhelming, sophisticated plan to dominate the world economically, militarily, in space and land. And Angus, Senator King referred to, Tibet being the edge of their sphere of influence. Well, with the Belt and Road Initiative, we know their sphere of influence is much, much bigger than that. And they want to influence the whole world, and we see how they treat their own people. So I think it's important for us to constantly educate Americans as to what the Chinese are up to. And I don't even know if my colleagues are aware, it was referenced briefly by some of the folks here, but I think it was just last week that a New York City police officer was arrested because he was working for the Chinese Communist Party to spy on the Tibetans. They actually have a recording of him talking to Chinese officials saying, go to the same center you and I, Chairman McGovern, did our hearing at. They said, make sure you go to this Tibetan center and you can watch what's going on there so you can see who's trying to undermine the Chinese efforts. In Elmhurst, Queens, just outside my district, in Grace Men's district, we had a rally in February of this year where we talked about the Elmhurst Library was showing historical propaganda from the Chinese Communist Party about the history of China. It was completely misleading to talk about the Tibetans. So the Tibetans rallied against it. And we got them to take that down at the Elmhurst Library. And we hear about the Confucius centers on a regular basis. So I want to ask, the Chinese have a sophisticated, well-organized economic propaganda plan, not only in their own country, but to export what they're doing in their country to other parts of the world. So I want to just ask the witnesses, can you give any other examples of things that we should be conscious of that the Chinese are doing beyond their borders, that we should be, especially in the United States? So I talked about the police officer that was arrested for spying, and the Confucius centers, the propaganda at the Elmhurst Library. What else are they up to that we need to be conscious of? We know the Uyghurs, we know about the Hong Kong students, we know about the Tibetans. What do we need to be conscious of?
If I may be that, Congressman, good to see you.
Thank you, Matteo.
And I think one issue that we should pay attention to is the plan of the Chinese media to expand the operations worldwide. Over the last 4 years, both the news state agency and the Chinese state TV, they have expanded to dozens of languages all over the world. So they basically take advantage of their entrance in the WTO, and they have free access to the markets in the world, and they use these tools for propaganda. At the same time, they do not open the huge Chinese market to any foreign media to be able to broadcast in China. Even New York Times, Chinese website is not available. China. So this goes back to the question of reciprocity, and also to the question that Senator King asked before. Certainly, export is a huge part, in the Chinese economy. But what China has been able to do is to take advantage of the economic opportunities outside, using with a strategic goal or expanding their influence, while at the same time restricting access to foreign companies in China, especially when it comes to media. As you know, social networks, Google, they're not allowed to have access to the Chinese market. So I think now many business people now realize that this is not sustainable. That you cannot allow Chinese companies to have access to their own internal market with this sort of monopoly, and then having free access to the markets all over the world. How can you compete with that? So I think that the question of rebalancing and calling for reciprocity and stopping those activities that are not reciprocated by China in the U.S., I think it's a sound approach to try to counter that effort.
Thank you, Matteo. And if everybody could just give me one brief thing that they should be aware of. Maybe Tenzin Dorji, you could give me Tenzin Tashi Delay. Can you give me one?
Hi, Senator Suozzi. Thank you. Good to see you. I think there are plenty of examples. Just this past week, I think we should also be paying attention to things that are happening inside the U.S. as well as outside the U.S. And a couple of years ago, people might remember there was a Tibetan, actually a Chinese agent who was ethnically Tibetan in Sweden, who was arrested in Sweden. And just this past week, the Swedish court decided to deport this Chinese agent working for the CCP. He was spying on the Tibetan community in Sweden. And I think that's, it may be happening in Sweden. It's a small country, but I think we got it. It's a very good indicator of what the Chinese government is doing, because
it's happening in New York City. I mean, it's happening right outside my district.
Absolutely. There is a very, very small Tibetan community in Sweden. And even on a small community, less than 100 people, even on a small community like that, the Chinese government is investing tons of resources spying on that community. And the New York case is exactly the same. In many ways, the Tibetan community, among the Tibetan community, we have suspected for a long time that the Chinese government was sending agents, informers, and their main goal, they have a twofold goal of doing this. And the first goal is, of course, to collect information and data and, from the local Tibetan community. And the other is to influence the community, actually. And this particular Chinese agent who was arrested a couple of weeks ago, it was very clear that what he was trying to do was to influence the Tibetan community not to engage in political activities. And he was wearing an NYPD uniform. And in the Tibetan community, there is a respect for, high respect for law enforcement, and he knows that. And I think the Chinese government's main goal in this case is to divide the Tibetan community in order to destroy the Tibetan movement, because they are really fully aware that the global Tibetan community, especially in the West, especially in America, have been extremely successful at inflicting a huge PR cost to the Chinese government. They've played a huge role alongside our supporters in exposing the brutalities of the Chinese government. And that's why several years ago, the Chinese government decided that they were not only going to crush the Tibetan people inside Tibet, but they were actually going to start paying attention to crush the Tibet movement globally. And this is part of their master plan. And what happened in New York is basically a tip of the iceberg.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if I have time left, but Dr. Richardson, just briefly.
Yeah, Mr. Suozzi, if I can make this even a little bit bleaker, because the problem is that you don't even just have to be Tibetan or Chinese to be experiencing these problems. About 3 weeks ago, Human Rights Watch led on a global civil society sign-on letter directed at, essentially at accountability for China at the Human Rights Council. And groups from Vietnam and Venezuela and Azerbaijan signed on. We had 2 groups in the United States that do not specifically do work inside China decline to sign, even anonymously, because they were afraid that it would be known they had joined and that it would compromise their ability to get ECOSOC status to be able to carry out advocacy at the United Nations.
Okay.
That's a serious problem.
Very serious. All right, thanks everybody. Tuduche, how do I say it, Tenzin? Tuduche?
Tojiche.
Tuduche.
You have great
Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for your good work. And I know a lot of people are really working hard, and we just want you to know that we support you, and this commission will continue to try and provide a voice for people that are really voiceless in this issue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.